Welcome to Classic Game Room. In between working on some big CGR Mark III reviews of Command & Conquer, The Framemeister, Dragonfire, and The Adventures of Tron, I thought it would be fun to bring back the old Sega versus Nintendo battle here in a competitive review. I've had a bunch of requests from you to get this guy on the show, the Sega Dreamcast, in a competitive review, which is of course unfair because I love the Dreamcast. I'm heavily biased, but let's talk for a moment that you've got $100 in your pocket and you want to get into collecting for either the Dreamcast or the N64. Which game system is better to collect for today? Which game system should you choose? Because you know the funny thing is they have more in common than you might expect. For starters, the Dreamcast and the N64 are contemporaries. They both came out in the 90s. They've both got awful controllers. So there's that. They both use memory cards. I think the N64 controller is worse than the Dreamcast controller, which says a lot right there. And the Dreamcast controller uses memory cards with screens, which is super cool. But the N64 has GoldenEye, which is really one of my favorite games of all time. The Sega Dreamcast, on the other hand, has GigaWing, which is another one of my favorite games of all time. So there's some great games on both game systems. Let's look at some other similarities. The Sega Dreamcast and the N64 each have 4 controller ports. That's twice what the PlayStation gave you, and 4 times the PC engine. Raise your hand if you enjoyed hours of 4-player GoldenEye 007 deathmatch. My hand is in the air. They both cost more or less the same these days. If you're shopping on eBay at least, look at the prices for the base model N64, not the fancy one, not the Pokemon one. It should cost you about the same amount of money as the base model Sega Dreamcast. In fact, the Dreamcast may even be a bit less. So if you're looking for the white-gray Dreamcast, not the Sega Sports model, not the Hello Kitty Dreamcast, yes, they have a Hello Kitty Sega Dreamcast. They should cost you more or less the same. So I think $100 will get you the game system, probably 2 controllers, a memory card or 2, and a stack of games. But it's unlikely that you're going to get Ocarina of Time or any of the GigaWing or Spaceship Shooter games or Border Down or something for that $100. I mean, Border Down alone will cost you a couple $100, and I have no idea what Ocarina of Time costs, but I'm pretty sure it's not inexpensive these days either. So this is tough. I think you should make your decision actually based on the game library. Because while they have a lot of things in common, the Dreamcast and the N64 both look and feel completely different. That's really what separates these game systems. They both got good games. They both got horrible games. Only one of them has Seaman, where you boil a fish voiced by Leonard Nimoy, but on the other hand, to be fair, the N64 has Robotron 64, which is an excellent game. The N64 has Wave Race 64, but the Dreamcast has Hydro Thunder. Yeah, I definitely like Hydro Thunder more, but Wave Race 64 is still a really good game. In fact, there's a lot of good driving games on the N64, but the Dreamcast has Ferrari F355 Challenge. I'm biased here. I would suggest Dreamcast, but what if you want to play the big Zelda games, or Pokemon, or the Mario games, or Donkey Kong? Well, then obviously you go N64. Or Perfect Dark. That game is better than I think we gave it credit for when we reviewed it, but at the time we were huge Sega Dreamcast fans. Still am. Neither game system is really known for their first-person shooters, except for perhaps GoldenEye, but you've also got Quake 2 on the N64. If you step it up the Dreamcast, you can use a mouse and keyboard and play Quake 3 Arena. You've got some other oddball games in there like Mach-In X. Watch my review of that game. No one ever talks about it. It's weird. You've got some RPG choices on the Dreamcast, probably more than the N64, but the N64 brings you more of those Nintendo games. It's a Nintendo game system, obviously. There's actually not that many games on the N64. They seemed fairly selective for the most part. But you've got Mario Kart 64, which I think is an incredible game. If you go over to the Sega Dreamcast, you've got your Resident Evil games. I think it depends on which kind of games you want to play. Here's what I would suggest. If you can't get both, perhaps, if you're a Nintendo fanboy or fangirl, it's time to step over to the dark side. check out the Dreamcast. I think you'll be surprised at how awesome it is. And on the flip side, if you're a Sega fanboy or fangirl, check out the N64. Even if you're not into the big Nintendo games, there's some surprising hidden gems in there on the N64. Robotron 64 is always one of my favorites to direct people to, but you've also got your Conker's Bad Fur Day, which I do have in the review schedule sometime this year or early next year. Banjo-Tooie, also in the review schedule sometime later this year or early next year. You got a lot of great games on the N64, and I know a lot of you are probably surprised to hear me say that, but it's a game system that you should not overlook. It's not the end-all be-all game system, and I think you have more variety on the Dreamcast. You've got brand new games still being released for the Sega Dreamcast, like Fast Striker, Gunlord, Stormwind. The games just keep coming out. Neo Zix, that game is insanely hard. So if you're into spaceship shooters, obviously there's only one choice there. That's, the Sega Dreamcast. But, they both got fun libraries, reasonably affordable, unless you get into the big games. Especially if you're trying to collect N64 games in the boxes, I wouldn't even go there. Just get the game cartridges that you can get the instruction manuals and just print them out from the internet. Game system-wise, they're fairly reasonably priced because neither one of them is rare, even though the N64 really outlasted the Dreamcast. Actually, I take that back. Since they're still making games for the Dreamcast, I think the Dreamcast has pretty much outlasted everything. So, the obvious answer is you should have both. I forgot about Sin and Punishment on the N64. That's amazing. But that game's not cheap either. So, there you go. Dreamcast versus N64. Personally, I'd go Dreamcast, but that's not an insult to the N64. The N64 is far better than I gave it credit for 10 years ago, and there's a lot of good games on there for it. So, check it out. There you go. Thanks for watching another Classic Game Room competitive review. Hopefully you've left more or less confused about this one, because even though they both cost more or less the same, you got a totally different look and feel. If you like fighting games, you go Dreamcast. If you like Nintendo games, you go N64. If you like driving games, I would go Dreamcast. If you like Nintendo games, you go N64. If you like spaceship shooters, 1980s arcade game remakes, RPGs that aren't Zelda, you go Dreamcast. If you like Nintendo games, you go N64. If you like fishing games, you go Sega Dreamcast. I can't hide the bias. I'm all for the Dreamcast, but don't overlook the N64's excellent collection of games. It's just a shame it doesn't have Mach-N X or Seaman. Get your CGR shirts and glassware at ClassicGameRoom.com. Classic Game Room is brought to you by Magnum Skywolf. CGR is supported by fans on Patreon. Thank you.